1. Encouragement for those who practice semen retention. Many who embark on the semen retention journey feel, at some point, that crushing weight of stagnation. It's natural. Days when your spirits are low, doubts are gnawing at you, and it seems like all your efforts were in vain. But, as a wise mentor would say, suffering for what is right is the price one pays to gain a strength that few will have. It's not about seeking perfection, but about understanding that this path, although arduous, shapes character like fire shapes iron. It is common to look at others, who are apparently unconcerned about discipline, and think, is it worth it? The answer is simple and powerful. Yes, it is. Aligning yourself with Christ and resisting sexual immorality is like building a house on the rock. Firm, stable, prepared to withstand the storms of life. Make no mistake, the world encourages giving in to impulses, but those who practice semen retention choose the path less traveled and more rewarding. When doubts arise or you feel like you are not making progress, remember something essential: every spiritual journey has its valleys. Even great spiritual figures, such as Paul, faced moments of weakness and questioning. The important thing is not to give up on the journey. Small daily actions, such as morning prayer or reading a psalm, can rekindle the inner flame. A good practical example is to establish a reinforcing ritual. Something simple: wake up and declare out loud the reason why you chose to retain semen. It may seem silly, but verbalizing it strengthens conviction. In addition, including physical practices, such as conscious breathing exercises, helps to anchor the mind and body in the decision made. Spiritual discipline is built with small, consistent bricks. And so, even on days when motivation seems to have evaporated, the reminder that suffering for justice has a greater purpose will serve as an anchor. After all, the first fruits of this choice will soon appear: spiritual and practical benefits that transform not only the individual, but the way he or she sees and interacts with the world. 2. Spiritual and practical benefits. The practice of semen retention offers benefits that go far beyond the physical aspect, reaching spiritual and practical dimensions that transform the lives of those who dedicate themselves seriously. The first impact is on mental clarity. Thoughts become organized, decisions become easier, and the mind starts to function like a clear river, free of debris. This clarity becomes a shield against distractions and confusion typical of a disorderly life. Spiritually, the practitioner feels a growing strength that drives him to resist worldly temptations. It is as if a new layer of protection surrounds his soul, allowing him to move through the most chaotic environments without becoming contaminated. Avoiding behaviors such as consuming pornography, for example, ceases to be a Herculean effort and becomes a conscious choice, which brings freedom rather than deprivation. Many who break free from the vicious cycle of pornography report a remarkable liberation. They leave behind spiritual stagnation and discover a vitality they never knew existed. This is a practical and powerful point. By cutting out these artificial stimuli, energy is redirected toward greater goals, whether it's developing a project, strengthening family bonds, or pursuing a higher purpose. A real example of this is the practice of establishing clear spiritual goals, such as meditating daily, reading uplifting books. I recommend John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, or Thomas A. Kempis' The Imitation of Christ, or even engaging in social work. These are simple attitudes, but they channel the energy accumulated by semen retention into concrete and transformative actions. Thus, little by little, those who remain focused realize that they begin to break the matrix, that invisible network of lustful influences that society imposes. And in this process, something even more powerful emerges: inner transformation, which allows us to see beyond superficial appearances and perceive people's true spiritual nature. 3. Transformation through semen retention. As one delves deeper into the practice of semen retention, one of the first signs of inner transformation is the development of keen discernment. One is no longer easily seduced by appearances or deceived by false promises. One's gaze becomes more attentive, able to perceive hidden nuances in the spiritual nature of people and situations. It is as if the veils of the superficial world are slowly being removed. This discernment does not arise merely as a gift, but as a natural consequence of preserved and directed vital energy. With a clearer mind and a stronger soul, the practitioner begins to avoid falling into the traps of seduction, manipulative media, and carnal temptations that once seemed irresistible. Suddenly, those flashy images or dubious invitations lose their power and cease to exert the same fascination. It is interesting to observe how this new perception can be applied in everyday life. For example, when watching a film or browsing social media, People begin to identify content that they previously consumed without a filter, but which they now recognize as mechanisms of control and distraction. This change is powerful, as it allows her to choose what truly builds her life, instead of passively allowing herself to be carried away by the stimuli of the world. But it is important to emphasize, this transformation only becomes spiritually significant when there is a true surrender of life to God. Semen retention, in isolation, is just a physical discipline. However, when aligned with higher spiritual purposes, it becomes a means of sanctification. Practices such as constant prayer, periodic fasting, and reading the Bible further strengthen the surrender, making RS a profoundly transformative experience. And so, the practitioner realizes that he is not only protecting himself from temptations, but he is also preparing for something bigger. The impact that this transformation will have on his social relationships, on the way he connects or distances himself from the people around him. 4. Social impact and isolation. As you move forward with the practice of semen retention, it is inevitable that you will notice a certain social distancing. Many friends, accustomed to more permissive patterns of behavior, may feel intimidated or even uncomfortable around someone who chooses a path of discipline and self-control. This distancing, although initially painful, is a natural reflection of personal growth. After all, when someone raises their standards, not everyone around them can keep up. This isolation does not mean loneliness, but rather a process of natural selection of relationships. True brotherhood, that which is based on mutual growth and faith, is rare, but when found, it becomes an invaluable treasure. Having people around you who also practice semen retention or who value self-development creates an environment conducive to spiritual strengthening. As the proverb says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another." For those who feel like they are losing friends in this process, it is worth remembering, quality always trumps quantity. Instead of desperately trying to maintain old ties that no longer make sense, the practitioner can invest in new connections. Participating in Bible study groups, personal development communities, or even online forums about semen retention are great ways to find people aligned with this new phase of life. A practical example of this is to establish regular meetings with friends who share similar values. This could be a weekly coffee date to exchange experiences, a prayer group, or even a workout partnership. These small alliances make the journey less lonely and more motivating. In addition, surrounding yourself with people who understand and support the practice of semen retention helps you stay focused and motivated. Over time, this social impact stabilizes and the practitioner realizes that the initial isolation was, in fact, a necessary cleansing to make room for healthier and more meaningful relationships. And in this more protected environment, the need arises to further develop discernment, especially to identify and resist camouflaged temptations, such as the famous analogy of the woman in the red dress. 5. The woman in the red dress analogy. The iconic scene from the film Matrix, where the woman in the red dress distracts Neo as an agent approaches, is a powerful metaphor for the worldly temptations that distract and can destroy the mission of those seeking evolution. In the practice of semen retention, this image translates into the constant seductions that the world offers. Easy pleasures, empty distractions, and superficial relationships that take us away from our greater purpose. These agents, as in the film, are not always physically dangerous people, but rather subtle and deceptive influences that infiltrate everyday life. They can be media content, toxic friendships, or even internalized thoughts that sabotage discipline. Therefore, the practitioner of semen retention needs to develop active vigilance, always testing the spirits and discerning the true intentions behind the proposals that arise along the way. A classic example of this is when someone has firmly decided to practice semen retention and suddenly begins to be bombarded with tempting invitations, parties, casual relationships, or erotic content. This is no coincidence. It is the famous spiritual resistance that tries to break the discipline. In these moments, practicing specific prayers, such as Psalm 91, or strengthening yourself by reading Proverbs about wisdom, can be a fortress against these influences. It is essential to understand that not all appearances are trustworthy. As Jesus said, "Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." This principle applies directly to the journey of semen retention. What appears attractive and harmless may be the very trap that leads you astray. Therefore, developing discernment and vigilance must be a daily practice. And even though, at times, temptation may seem irresistible, it is important to remember, even the most disciplined can fail. What sets a strong man apart is not the absence of falls, but the ability to get up and keep going. And, precisely for this reason, it is essential to know how to deal with setbacks and learn to transform them into fuel to move forward. 6. Dealing with relapses. In the journey of semen retention, it is inevitable that a relapse will occur at some point. Many despair at this point, believing that all the effort has been wasted. But here is a truth that few have the courage to say: failure is part of the process. The important thing is not the failure itself, but what is done after it. Sincere regret, followed by resilience, transforms failure into a learning experience, further strengthening the determination to continue. The biggest mistake a relapser can make is to be too hard on themselves after a relapse. This excessive self-judgment creates a toxic cycle of guilt that, paradoxically, can lead to further relapses. Instead, it is wiser to view the relapse as a mirror that reveals weak spots that can be strengthened. For example, if boredom was the trigger, it may be time to fill your routine with more uplifting and engaging activities. The typical modern man is constantly seduced into seeking instant gratification, living under the control of his impulses. On the other hand, the one who seeks spiritual discipline through semen retention is treading a completely opposite path, one of self-control and transcendence. This distinction is crucial. It is not a competition, but a conscious choice between remaining in mediocrity or seeking a higher level of existence. One practical strategy for dealing with relapses is to create a containment plan. This includes identifying triggers, establishing preventative measures, and seeking support. For example, when feeling vulnerable, you might turn to an inspiring book, such as Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, do some intense exercise, or even reach out to a trusted mentor or friend who shares the same practice. Thus, the practitioner understands that the journey is not linear, but full of curves, ups and downs. And, by accepting this reality with maturity, he prepares himself to live a powerful testimony. A true story of overcoming the struggles against lust, which inspires and transforms not only his own life, but the lives of many around him. 7. Personal testimony. Many people start practicing semen retention after being inspired by real-life testimonies of people who have managed to overcome seemingly insurmountable struggles. It is not uncommon to hear stories of people who, after years of fighting internal battles against lust, find freedom and joy that previously seemed unattainable. And these stories have immense power. They show that it is possible, that it is not a spiritual utopia, but a concrete reality. One such testimonial is that of a man who, after a decade of being trapped by sexual impulses and addictions, found inspiration when he met a confident individual who had been practicing semen retention for years. The encounter was a turning point. Upon seeing the serenity and magnetism of that person, he realized that there was a viable and transformative alternative, capable of freeing him from the slavery of disordered desires. What was most striking about this story was not only his ability to resist temptation, but also the joy and freedom he experienced. It was as if, by giving up immediate gratification, he had accessed an inexhaustible source of energy and inner peace. This transformation impacted not only his spiritual life, but also his family, professional, and social relationships. He became a silent but powerful example of discipline and purpose. For those who are just starting out or going through difficult times on their journey, these testimonies serve as beacons in the darkness. They prove that, no matter how long the struggle, there is a real possibility of victory. And the best part, this victory does not depend on superhuman strength, but on small daily decisions, constant adjustments, and a sincere willingness to not give up even when faced with setbacks. And when one understands the depth of this transformation, it becomes impossible not to realize that, behind it, there is an even more solid foundation: the essential role of Christ, who gives meaning, direction, and support to this entire process. 8. The role of Christ. While semen retention alone brings tangible benefits, it is when it is aligned with faith that it reaches its true transformative potential. Many practice this discipline solely for physical or psychological reasons, but discover that something essential is missing: a solid spiritual foundation. Without Christ, retention is like peanut butter without jelly. It has substance, but it lacks the sweetness and completeness that give real flavor and meaning to the journey. Christ not only strengthens resolve, but also provides direction. The practice of semen retention, when surrendered to Him, ceases to be a solitary battle and becomes a spiritual partnership. Through sincere prayer, the practitioner finds comfort in setbacks and strength in victories. Through fasting, he disciplines the body and strengthens the spirit. And by immersing himself in the Scriptures, he finds timeless wisdom to face daily temptations. A practical example of this is the recommendation to establish a daily time for Bible reading, starting, for example, with the book of Proverbs, which is full of advice on self-control, discipline, and wisdom. In addition, incorporating the habit of fasting, even once a week, helps to align the body and spirit, reinforcing the disposition to resist the temptations that surround those who practice semen retention. Without this relationship with Christ, the practice of retention can easily become a source of pride or an exercise in mere willpower. But when guided by faith, it becomes an act of humility, devotion, and sanctification. God's grace becomes the fuel that fuels perseverance and joy, even on difficult days, always remembering that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And it is precisely in this union with Christ that the practitioner begins to perceive the most profound lessons of life. Lessons that go far beyond the practice itself, and that teach about obedience, patience, and true spiritual strength. 9. Life lessons. As one perseveres in the practice of semen retention, one truth becomes clear. The greatest blessings are directly linked to obedience to God. This is not a system of automatic rewards, but a spiritual law that governs life. Those who choose to obey, even when the world shouts the opposite, end up reaping the fruits of peace, emotional stability, and a renewed purpose. This lesson, though simple, is powerful. Another fundamental lesson is patience. We live in an age of instant gratification, where everything seems to be just a click away. But semen retention teaches the opposite, that true growth takes time, effort, and consistency. Each day of discipline is a brick placed in the construction of an inner fortress. And those who understand this principle do not despair at the slowness of the process, but trust that the harvest will come in due season. Maintaining self-control in times of trial is an indelible mark of true spiritual strength. It is not just about resisting sexual urges, but about cultivating an attitude of self-mastery in all areas of life. Practical examples include learning to control one's tongue to avoid gossip, staying calm in conflict situations, or postponing immediate pleasures in favor of greater goals. Each of these attitudes strengthens one's spiritual muscles. This lesson is masterfully illustrated by historical figures such as Joseph of Egypt, who resisted the seduction of Potiphar's wife and, because of his integrity, was elevated to positions of honor. The same is true for those who practice semen retention. Momentary renunciation is always a prelude to future exaltation. Understanding this completely changes perspective, as it transforms daily struggle into an opportunity for personal refinement. And, as the practitioner assimilates these lessons, he or she finds himself or herself faced with an irresistible invitation to share this knowledge, to encourage others, and to persevere even further, especially since there is a final encouragement that needs to be heard by everyone, whether believers or skeptics, about the transformative power of this practice. 10. Final encouragement. Regardless of where you are on your journey, whether you're already practicing semen retention or haven't even started yet, one thing is certain: you've been called to something greater. You may still be doubtful, you may be surrounded by uncertainty, but there's a spark within you that yearns for freedom, purpose, and true connection with God. And that calling doesn't depend on religious titles or perfection, just a heart that's willing to seek. Even the most skeptical, those who have never imagined themselves praying, are invited to try it. It is not about repeating ready-made phrases or following cold rituals. It is about going into your room, closing the door, and speaking to God as you would to a loving Father. Ask for revelation. Ask for clarity. Say, "If you really exist, show me." This sincere search has the power to open your spiritual eyes and free your soul from the invisible prison of the world. Semen retention is more than a challenge of self-control. It is a path to liberation. Lust, when mastered, ceases to be an internal enemy and becomes a transformed energy, a life force that can be used to create, build, and love with purity. And when this power is combined with spirituality, a new man is born. A man who not only survives in this world, but who walks with authority and truth. Personal experiences leave no doubt. Those who persevere find more than physical or mental benefits. They experience a spiritual revolution. Their outlook changes. Their presence changes. And little by little, those around them begin to notice that something is different. This is more than discipline, it is light. And this light does not come from the ego, but from a connection with something infinitely greater. So, before moving forward, accept this invitation. Seek God for yourself. Without intermediaries, without fear, without masks. Because when you find Him, and He lets Himself be found, everything around you will begin to make sense. And the next step, inevitably, will be to leave the matrix, with awareness, purpose, and power. If this content impacted you in any way, like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. This way you will continue to receive deep and transformative content about semen retention, spiritual development, and how to escape, once and for all, from the invisible clutches of the system that wants to keep you weak. See you in the next video. So, are you going to take the next step? What I'm explaining here is much more detailed in my ebook The Power of Semen Retention. There is a simple step-by-step guide for you to apply in your daily life. It is very worthwhile.